Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're looking at Audi's fairly new facelifted R8 rear wheel drive. Yes, that's right, this time they call it the rear wheel drive as opposed to the rear wheel series that the pre-facelift was called. I don't know if that was Audi in a little bit of denial and not wanting to fully accept that they'd made an R8 that was only driven via the rear wheels. Before we start, I just want to say two big thanks. One to the Lonsborough Park Cricket Club here in Yorkshire for giving this amazing place to do the intro. I'm sure you'll agree that the scenery around us is just incredible. This place is just so private and idyllic. And the second big thanks goes to my good friend Tom for hosting me for the past couple of days up here in Yorkshire. We've been taking out his GT3 and his quite amazing Taycan as well. The last Audi R8 that I had was actually last April. It was the R8 V10 Performance Carbon Edition. I think that's what it was called. It certainly had a long name. But what I do know about that particular car is it retailed at just over £170,000. Now I took that to Germany and I did a high-speed run. I actually almost achieved 212 miles an hour. So if you haven't seen that video, the link to it is up here, and I think it's actually one of my personal favourites, if not my personal favourite. I really enjoyed that trip. This bad boy actually retails at somewhat less than that car. So we're looking at a retail price with options at about £116,000, which is still an awful lot of money, but it's not when you consider that this is really a V10 supercar and an absolute work of art. We know the R8 very well now. The first generation and this the second generation. In fact, this is the second generation facelifted car, but it still looks very similar and recognizable to the original R8. What it does lack compared to its more expensive offerings is things like the colored side blades. So normally you'd see that section of the car would be an alternative color, so maybe black, so that would be black and also that would be black, but on this one it's all body color, so that's usually a bit of a telltale sign as to this being a rear wheel drive option. And in fact at the moment you can't even option different colors for the side blades. Obviously you could get them wrapped or changed. I think it's a bit of a mixed opinion on whether it looks better or worse. I actually don't mind it. The one thing I'm not the biggest fan of with this car is the wheels that it comes on. I love the fact they're 19-inch and that there's a lovely substantial bit of tyre there. I really like that, and it looks almost more race car, but I just don't like the design. I think they look like they might belong on a Q5 diesel S-Line or something. They're really not that exciting. So please go for the optional 19 forged wheels. They're also diamond cut. They just look so much better. Same size, much lighter, and just look the business. They're £1,000, but I think if you're buying one of these, it's a tiny little percentage of the overall price. And also in terms of residual value, surely going to help, because I just can't see these standard wheels doing the residual value of this car any good. What else does this entry-level rear-wheel drive version lack compared to its more expensive Quattro siblings? We've already talked about some of the visuals, so the side blades, but the 5.2 litre V10 still exists underneath the, I guess you'd call it, boot. But in this car, it's detuned to 540 horsepower, so down about 60 horsepower compared to the R8 V10 Performance that I had last year. Do you notice that? Well, we'll talk about that once we get on the road, but I can say that this being the rear-wheel drive car, it does actually lack a bit of weight. So it is down on power, but it's also down on weight, and therefore the power to weight figure is actually not as big a difference as you would expect. Jumped inside and it's all massively familiar in here. The cabin of the R8 really hasn't changed in the past 5 or 6 years. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it's just so nice and simple in here. There's not a touch screen in sight. There are some of the best climate controls I've ever seen on a car. In fact, it's very similar to the Audi TT, another cabin that I absolutely love. I just love that everything is so driver centric. I've got a really nice virtual cockpit in front of me, really nice wheel. and the controls are kind of where I want it. There are some flawed things in here, like the cup holders aren't big enough, and when you've got something in there, any form of drink, they're kind of in the way because obviously naturally your arm goes down there. But otherwise everything else in here is really nice. I've got really good vision, especially out the front, and for a supercar it's actually not too bad out of the back. This particular press car thankfully isn't too loaded. I do wish, as we just talked about, that it had the optional 19s on it, and it has got this beautiful Ara metallic blue paint that I believe is maybe a couple of grand. The only other option that this has had ticked is the Bang & Olufsen sound system, which I must admit I haven't turned on once yet because you're kind of always listening to the V10. Other things to point out in here are the seats. These are the regular R8 seats that I've spent a lot of time in over the years, but being this is the base model car, it actually has a very stripped back version of the seat. So it's got Alcantara down the center, it doesn't have any nice quilted leather, but if anything, it offers a bit more support due to the Alcantara. In terms of the actual way that I fit these seats, well, they're not brilliant. I think anyone over 6 foot is going to struggle, but that's kind of the theme for the R8 in general, because I do feel a little bit cramped in here. But otherwise, as I say, it's a dated cabin, but it still works, and I'm not in here wanting for any more. It does exactly what it says on the tin. Providing I've got a mount for my phone, which I have, I can get all of my Waze and stuff running there, and away you go. Right, let's get this out on the road and see what it drives like. Almost lost my sunglasses. What's this entry-level R8 like? Well, I've had this car for about a week now, and I've done almost 800 miles in it. Mixed miles, traffic jams, motorways, and glorious roads like the one we're on at the moment. Do I feel like I'm missing out on much? Do I feel like I wish I was in the R8 Quattro or Performance, like the one that I had last year? Not particularly. I really think this car has got pretty much everything that the Quattro has, bar extreme conditions sort of grip. I have the traction control off in this car, and I've only really noticed the rear wheels wanting to spin up once or twice in really wet conditions. It has exceptional grip because the engine, a lot of the weight's over the back, and they're massive tyres. I think they're 295 section tyres, so plenty of physical grip, plenty of rubber on the tarmac. So a bit like a 911, you've got a really positive rear end. The steering, well, I think the steering feels better in this than it does in the Quattro version, and that would make sense because the front axle has only got the steering to do as opposed to the drive and the steering, so I think it feels really, really good. The 5.2 litre V10, does it feel like it's lacking some horses compared to the top of the range R8? Well, I haven't driven one for over a year, so it is hard to say yes or no. But what I can tell you is when you shift it down, it's going to first, and you get towards the top of the rev range, there's nothing quite like it. It's just so ferocious up there. I'm not accelerating and going, oh, I wish I had that extra 60 horsepower that the top of the range car has. Not in this one anyway, but again, maybe it's just because I haven't been driving cars that have got much more than 500 horsepower recently, so this just feels fast enough. But this is lighter. I think it's about 50 kilos lighter than the Quattro version, so that power to weight figure isn't going to be as big a difference as you might expect. In terms of performance figures, it has a top speed of 199 miles an hour, although I'm in no doubt this would do over 200. That's probably an Audi quoted figure, again, to protect the more expensive car. It also has a 0 to 62 claimed figure of 3.7 seconds, although with my Racebox GPS device I managed to record this down south a few days ago doing 3.4 seconds to 62 miles an hour in a rear wheel drive car. It's just insane. That gives you a good idea of just how much traction this car's got. But I also did do some Racebox launches up here for you guys to see, so let's cut to that, watch them, and then you can join me back here. We can enjoy more of this drive. Okay, launch control in the R8 rear wheel drive. Here we go. First attempt. We got some wheel spin there, then the electronics tried to override it and it bogged down a little bit. So 3.99, it's not bad, sub 4 seconds. I know it can go a lot faster though. Launch control ready, here we go. .79, that's getting a little bit quicker. Again, we're on a slight incline here, and the road, the tarmac's got a little bit of gravel on it, which definitely isn't helping with the initial bit of the launch. Okay, here we go again. Launch control activated. Again, struggling for traction. Another 3.79. As you've seen, we got very close to the quoted 3.7 seconds. The tarmac up here just doesn't have that grip. It's also a bit damp, so I think we can let the car off, because I know that it's capable of actually going under 3.5 seconds in perfect conditions, which is mighty impressive for a rear wheel drive car. I want to talk about the plus points, the stuff that I've really enjoyed with this car in the time that I've had it, and then we'll talk about the negative points, because as with all of these cars, there are plus points and there are negative points. Plus points, well, £115,000, that's not cheap, that's a lot of money. I'll never be able to afford one of these unless I win the lottery. But when you compare it to the R8 V10 Performance Carbon Edition, I think it was called, that I had last April, that was just over £170,000. So when you compare like for like, you're looking at an extra £55,000 for essentially a very similar package. So I wouldn't say it's brilliant value for money, but I wouldn't say that it's bad value for money. I think it's a V10 sports / supercar for just over £100,000, brand new, that is. So I think it's it is decent value. Next point I'm going to talk about, which might confuse many of you, is fuel consumption and how good this car is. Yes, a V10 powered supercar that has decent fuel consumption. On the way up here yesterday, okay, I was at 70 miles an hour, mostly on the M1, very boring drive, but I managed to average over 30 miles to the gallon in this car, which is just incredible, and actually gives it a theoretical range of about 470 or 500 miles on a decent run. So that's really impressive, I think, because I would struggle to get 2/3 of that in my M2 competition, and my M2 competition would not average over 30 miles to the gallon, even sitting at a consistent 70 miles an hour. Looks, I've always loved the way the R8s look, and when this facelifted R8 came out at the beginning of last year, I wasn't blown away by it. There's a lot of fake vents going on, but the more time I spend with this car, I love walking back up to this car and getting in it, and the amount of smiles and thumbs up that I've been given since I've been in this car, and that always happens in an R8. Really does give you a feel-good factor, you know. A lot of supercars, Ferraris especially, red ones, you don't get such nice friendly hand gestures. You get other ones that aren't so friendly. You just don't get that in the R8. It's almost got like the Aston Martin effect, I guess. Aston Martin pre-AMG, obviously. Practicality. I wasn't sure whether to put that as a positive or a negative, but I actually think it's not too bad practicality wise. The front is big enough to put a small suitcase in and some other bags padded around it, and you've got this shelf behind the driver and passenger seat that you can put like hold all bags in, soft ones and stuff, and there's a few little cubby holes around the cabin. Really, it's not too bad in here. For people that have driven many other supercars, they might get in this and go, yeah, you know what, it's actually reasonably practical, even down to, it's like a nice little cubby hole here underneath the climate controls. It's a decent place to live out of, and therefore it makes it a decent daily, if you like. And while we're talking about practicality in cabin, although this cabin is getting on now and it is starting to feel a little bit dated, I absolutely love it. I think Audi's R8 and TT cabins are the best. They're so stripped out. Everything you need is here and everything you don't is gone. And it's just very driver centric. I love it. You've got the brilliant virtual cockpit. Okay, I would prefer to have a head-up display, but the climate controls and everything down, everything's just exactly where you want it, and it's just very, very uncluttered, and I love that feeling. I've got an amazing view out front here, huge windscreen, like just absolutely probably one of the best windscreens to look out of all cars. Yeah, the view from behind is quite a bit smaller, a bit more letterbox-like, but I can still see all of the road and utilise my rear view mirror. Again, out the side mirror is absolutely fine. There are a couple of blind spots over my shoulders, but I have to say again, for a supercar, it's really not too bad. On to the negative points. There's not too many of them, and they are the same negative points that I talk about in a lot of R8s over the years. The first one is driving position. Again, for someone of my height, I'm maybe not quite right. You know, I feel like I'm sitting way too high. I tend to hunch over on long journeys in this car, mostly to get my eye line down below the sun visor, because if I sit upright, it's just not quite right. And there's just something that's not quite right about the driving position. It's not bad, and again, I think for anyone 6 foot or below, it's probably spot on. But for me, at 6'4", I just feel a little bit tall in here. I always feel tall, but I feel a little bit too tall for this car, and I wish I could sit 2-3 inches lower. It would make all the difference in the world. The wheels, well, we've kind of talked about the wheels on the outside of the car. I'm really not the biggest fan of these. They have grown on me a tiny bit, but they do look like they belong on a Q5. They really do. And I think anyone who is buying one of these is going to tick that optional wheel box. £1,000 and you get wheels that look 1,000 times better, in my opinion. Same size, you retain the ride comfort. In fact, that's another point that I haven't really talked about that I think is pretty good. This hasn't got the magnetic ride. It's a passive setup, but the ride is actually pretty decent. Last couple of things, the bonnet closure, I don't like the way that closes. It's very awkward. Sometimes it closes, sometimes it doesn't. It's difficult to get it right, and considering that is effectively your boot, you are opening and closing it a lot, and I haven't found the right knack to it. Maybe it's just me, but I've done it a lot of times and I just can't get it quite right, so that is a little bit frustrating. The other thing that frustrates me is these horrible little paddles that are on the back of this otherwise lovely steering wheel. I complained about them in the RWS about 3 years ago. They're effectively the same paddles that come in a base spec Golf GTI Mark 7. They shouldn't be in this car. They feel a bit cheap on the Golf in a £115,000 supercar. They just shouldn't be there, these paddles. They are really unpleasant to touch. They're very, very cheap plastic. They do the job. And you know, the gearbox itself isn't bad, but they're just a little bit offensive in a car like this. But that's about it. That's my only complaints. I think otherwise, yeah, really enjoyed my time with this car. And in fact, let's finish the video just driving it down a really nice section of road. It's just brilliant. It is too fast for most of the public roads, especially in the UK. It really is. Because of the long gearing, it does tend to creep up very quickly, so you've got to keep an eye on that. But that is hard because you've got that addictive V10 soundtrack playing behind you. Just sign off enjoying the sound of the V10, because let's face it, that's what dominates this car. Although in modern R8s they don't sound as good as older R8s because of all the regulations, but I'm sure if you stripped off this exhaust and got rid of those OPF filters, etc., you could make this sound very, very good. Gotta watch out for the sheep up here. Right guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Please give us a thumbs up if you did. Thanks a lot for watching as always. Leave any comments and questions below. Thanks to my buddy Tom for helping me with all the filming and logistics for this video. I will see you at the next one. Cheers.